Well, thank you for hosting us this weekend. We've been blessed. Let's bow our heads for an word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for the food that we just enjoyed as we spend some time together this afternoon looking at church planting and how we can have a ripple effect from one church impacting an area much greater and larger than might be otherwise thought. Lord, I pray that you'll expand our vision for your work in Jesus' name. Amen. I was just sharing with your Bible workers, this lady, Faye Mullins, her technique is just to meet people wherever she can and build a friendship with them. So a lot of her baptisms come from actually people that she's met at the grocery store. And so she gets their information. She spends 5 months generating as many contacts as she can. And at the end of the 5 months, she opens up her home and runs 7 months of Bible studies every week in her home. And as a result, sometimes 50 people a year join the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So it's a great commitment. But I think a lost art, at least in North America, is that of opening our homes to minister to people. And it certainly is a biblical concept, and I think one that we should be emulating in all of our churches. Biblically, they opened up their home day by day, right? Their homes were open. And I have a whole other presentation that we don't have time to look at today. But the message that somebody gets by being in a home, Ellen White says it's more powerful than any sermon that can be preached. The impact of the human home upon the heart. So really, I think this is a place to really look at how we minister to one another. Is opening our homes that way is quite powerful. So I know that this is something Faye does, and it's no wonder that she's being used by God that way. What I want to look at this afternoon is church planting and share a little bit of my experience with it. Then we'll open up and take some time for questions. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, which is right here. You recognize this map of the United States. Does it look about right to you? Did you know Texas is the only state that has a right to fly the flag at the same height as the United States does? So Texas can put their flag right at the same level. All the other states have to have it lower. We also have the right in our Constitution for Texas to be able to secede from the rest of the United States and be our own separate country, which has been threatened under the current governor. He got fed up so much to one point that he was about ready to recommend that we do that. But it is they say everything is bigger in Texas. And it truly is the reality. And so this is my church planting experience really all took place here. But I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, moved to Washington State, grew up in the Pacific Northwest, very beautiful area, but was called back to Texas to plant a church. And I'll share a little of the story. The area I was called to was Plano, Texas, which is north of Dallas-Fort Worth, which is a major metro area. We're in the north side of that. It's a very affluent area. Anytime there's a lot of affluence, people say that should be more difficult, right? The work is a little harder when people have everything they need in terms of physical well-being. And so a lot of affluence there. In fact, also it was voted, and this is very recently, here in 2010, it was voted as the safest city in America. So not only is there affluence, but there's safety and comfort, right? And saying here, the city has the lowest rate of violent crime of all major cities. Plano, Texas has always been known as a terrific city, and a great majority of the citizens will sing its praises loudly. But to be recognized by Forbes as the safest city in America is something Plano can truly hang its hat on. So again, this is a great place. No Seventh-day Adventist church. And I'm receiving a call to plant a church there, and then you see that many major companies in the United States have made their headquarters right there, established right there in Plano, Texas. So these are some household names, all of these in the United States, but you may recognize some of these companies. But look at their huge corporate offices, all located there. And so this is a city of affluence, of great success, of safety, and also mega churches. One of the churches that is quite famous there is the Prestonwood Baptist Church. And they'll have between 20 and 25,000 members. And so you look at this and say, well, where does the Adventist church fit? We have a unique mission as a Seventh-day Adventist church. Every church of any denomination can say that the Great Commission is their calling, right? Matthew 28. But we as a Seventh-day Adventist church also have the addition of the three angels' message that is part of what we're called to preach, which means we have additional insights and biblical truth for those that are already believers. And so as we look at these churches that are mega churches and this safe city with corporate success, where is our role as a Seventh-day Adventist church? So I was called to plant a church there. It was during the winter that I went down to interview. It was a mother church, a good-sized church like this one, that had, at the time, a little over 400 people attending every Sabbath in 2 worship services. And so I interviewed there. When I arrived, it was winter. It was cold. The wind was blowing. It was ice as well. And I parked underneath this tree, and it filled up with these birds they call grackles. And they're just annoyances. And they squawk and carry on. And it's like Christmas ornaments on this tree right over my car. And I'm leaving from the Pacific Northwest, which is just gorgeous, just beautiful, mountains and rivers and an amazing place to live, to this place where I'm greeted by these grackle birds and the sleeting, cold, biting wind. I drive down to where the conference headquarters are at, and it is a miserable drive. A smokestacks, industries kind of thing going on. And I thought, how in the world can I take this call to move to Plano? Now, Plano's very nice, but my other experiences that I was having were not so nice considering the call. And so I asked the conference if I could wait a week to give them a decision because I was going to be going to Hawaii on vacation the following week. While I was in Hawaii, when I landed, it's tropical breezes and palm trees and snorkeling and nice beaches. So I decided to go talk with the Hawaii conference. And I sat down with the conference president. I said, I'm considering a call to Texas. Do you have any options in Hawaii? And he said, turn down the call to Texas. We want you to come to Hawaii. I thought, wow, this is great. Hawaii. But I knew from the time I was in Texas that that's where God was calling me. Because God had made it very clear, despite the surroundings, that that's where He wanted me to be. And I've learned that I'm the most fulfilled and satisfied when I'm where God wants me to be. Our physical circumstances and surroundings are really non-consequential. You live in a beautiful place, but if it's not where God wants you to be, you're in the wrong place. After I worked in Australia in the mid-90s, I wanted in the worst way to come back here. That's where I felt like I need to come back here and work here. And I got pretty close. I had a call to New Zealand that I wasn't able to accept. It's not quite there, is it? It's just one plane stop too short of Australia, right? But, and at this point, I could come here if I would choose to do that. And President Justin's a friend of mine, But I'm where God wants me to be right now. And that's the most important thing. So I knew God was calling me to Texas. But I decided to go ahead and just see if Ellen White ever said anything about Plano, Texas. Now, what's the chance of that? Have you ever looked up to see if she said anything about Kingscliff? That would be like doing that. She lived here for a while in Australia, right? So she wrote about some of the communities here, I'm sure. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to just Google her writings and see what shows up. And here's what I discovered. I was amazed. We left them to attend Plano camp meeting held November 12 to 19, 1878. So this is before she came to Australia, right? She says, the weather was fine at the commencement, but soon it began to rain. And this with high winds, I could relate to this description, prevented a general attendance from the surrounding country. She says, we were highly pleased to find a large and intelligent intelligent body of brethren on the ground. My testimony was never received more readily and heartily than by this people. I became deeply interested in the work in the great state of Texas. See, she even knows it's a great state, right? But I looked at this and said, the large and intelligent body of believers, where are they? Where'd they go? No church, 250,000 people. No Seventh-day Adventist church. Where'd they go? And then I was impressed that she said that her testimony was never received more readily and heartily than by these people. These are some amazing people in Plano, Texas. And so as I did a little more research, here's what I discovered. Ellen White turned 51 at Plano camp meeting. She rode on a lumber wagon pulled by 2 mules, the 18 miles between Plano and Dallas. Look at this. She said, nothing was wanting to make us comfortable. Our friends who had recently embraced the truth in Plano had anticipated our wants and liberally supplied for them in the furnishing of our tent. 13 people were baptized, and then this is the part that really grabbed me. The Texas conference was actually organized in Plano, Texas, during that camp meeting. So I felt like I had a prophetic calling. Wow, this is exciting. An opportunity to serve God in a place where there was once a large, intelligent body of believer, but they left. And we needed a presence there. Literally thousands of lost people. So what's the first thing you want to do when you arrive? I'm called to embed, so to speak, in this mother church, and then launch out with a group of people that want to plant into the community to the north. So I'm going to this church of a little over 400 attending to be an associate pastor, but to be a church planter. And the idea is that, once I'm able to gather together a core group, we incubate for a while, we put our plans together, we launch out and start a new church in Plano. That was the original plan. So what do I want to do first? I want to talk with the leaders, right? I want to hit the ground running. And so I was excited for our first elders meeting. And it was a good Texan elders meeting. We met at the Golden Corral Buffet. Ay, ay, ay. Wow. All you can eat, right? So it was a brunch. And as we arrived, the senior pastor was there, the head elder, and in a church of this size, there were at least 10 elders. None of the other elders showed up. I was a little concerned. Here I am just arriving to talk with the elders about church planting, and they're not even interested enough to come out for a free meal. So I begin to think there's some real problems here. And so I immediately kick in a plan of I'm going to start visiting these elders one by one in their home. And I also made another plan that we would have the next elders meeting in my home, and we'd ask them to bring their spouses with them and their families. And that is something the church started doing every month after that. On a Saturday night, once a month, the elders and their spouses with their families would come for an elders meeting on a Saturday night. And I believe in natural church development, church health. This is one of the best things you can do for your church in terms of improving the health of your church, is your leaders to have that kind of connection together, that kind of fellowship. And we do too many things as a church to separate families. And this was just a win all the way around. So all the elders came out the next month. But in between, I started visiting elders in their home. And as I went to the home of one very influential member who was 6 months short of being a charter member of the church, this was one of his great regrets in life, that he didn't make it in time to be a charter member some 40 years ago. Influential man. Everybody knows this guy. I sat down in his living room, began visiting with him, and almost immediately, this is what he told me. I don't want to hear another word about church planting. Now think about this for a moment. I've just relocated from a beautiful area, a great conference who wanted me to stay, and I've gone down to Texas, and here I've arrived thinking I'm going to be planting a church. I've read all these quotes from Ellen White. I feel like God's calling me, and this elder's saying I don't want to hear another word about it. I knew he had the influence to shut the thing down. So what am I to do now? Go and discuss with the person next to you. What would you do from that point? What are the options? All right, did we come with some ideas? We have to have discussions because it's after lunch, right? Keep us alert. By the way, I want to just make an official announcement regarding your lunch. It's been enough time now since I ate it. And I can tell you, I just want to be really honest that I don't tell other churches this. I've never told another church this, okay? And I likely, based on what I experienced, will not be telling another church this. You guys are not only in the top 5, you're number 1. That is the best fellowship meal I've ever had at a church. And I understand you didn't even pull out all the stops, but that was absolutely stunning. That was incredible. Especially, I'm a vegan. That was just unbelievable. So as an Adventist fellowship meal, that hits the very, very top. And that includes literally hundreds of churches in many, many different countries. So way to go. Your praises will be sung for that reason, if none other. So now let's do it for being a church planting church, all right? I'd rather do it for that reason, but for now we'll do it for the food. That was awesome. Okay, what'd you come up with? What are we going to do with this elder? Yes?
I'll just ask him straight up, what brought him to that point?
Okay.
I want to make a statement on that.
Good, okay. We need to understand a little bit more, seek to understand before we pass judgment. Okay?
Become his friend.
Become his friend. We've got to be close to this guy, right? Okay. Any other ideas?
You want to make sure that he wasn't sick of hearing that talk and you wanted some action.
Okay. All right. Maybe the church has been talking for a long time and he wants to see some action. Okay. So we need to understand where he's coming from, right? Yes.
Talk to a lot of other people in the church and get them expressing themselves too. So
Good.
they fundamentally stand between you and
Yeah. And here's what I discovered. By visiting the other elders, I discovered that what he had expressed is what the others were also feeling. So he wasn't alone, but he was the most expressive with it and the most forthright in telling me how he really felt. So here's what I did. I went to the next board meeting, and I said, I'd like to make a statement. This church is not ready to plant a church. You know what they said? Loud. Amen. So I knew I hit it on the head. I said, but what I'd like to do is focus on becoming a healthy congregation first, before we even think about planting. So we began to focus on natural church development, which you're familiar with, and church health. And we were very early. I was one of the first 5 Seventh-day Adventist churches in North America to actually take the survey and begin working the process. I've been working it ever since. Again, literally hundreds of churches I've worked with on church health. And we began to slowly work on the idea of becoming healthy. And what I learned, though, is something very important about church planting, and that is that churches do not naturally move towards church planting. It's not the thing you're most excited about putting on the church board agenda to say, hey, we want to plant a church. Even in the few cases where there's a group of lay people say we want to plant a church, it's been very difficult to see that thing actually materialize, to see it actually happen. And there's a number of reasons why they don't naturally move towards church planting. One is the loss of fellowship. You know, it's amazing how we celebrate when somebody gets a new job, a promotion, even if it's another part of the country. We throw a party, we're going to miss them, right? But if a group of people leave to start a new church in another area of town, we make them feel like they're abandoning us, that they're deserting us, rather than that we're actually sending them out as missionaries. Yes, they're missionaries, but they're in our own community as missionaries. And we should actually be laying hands on them and blessing them as an extension of our church, rather than treating them like they're traitors. But oftentimes in churches we get this mixed up, and people feel like, well, how can they abandon us? How can they leave us? Do they not care about us? And these are some of the motions that churches deal with. The next one here is a loss of finances. This is probably one of the biggest ones people are concerned about, because they're used to having a certain number of resources for the church to function well. And when some people that have deep pockets, do you use that phrase here, deep pockets? Yeah, a lot of cash in the pockets, right? When they go somewhere else, people get concerned and say, well, how are we going to take care of matters here at the home front? The next one here is a loss of ministry leaders. For most churches, nominee committee time is the most painful time in the church experience. You know, this once a year. Do you do once a year or twice, or once every 2 years? Once a year? I would recommend immediately to go to a 2-year cycle. It is painful, and it's unnecessary. If you do a 2-year cycle where folk can bow out at any time in the cycle because there's a system in place to, replace the leader, most people have no problem going to a 2-year cycle, because it's a real consumption of church energy focused around that. And to do that every year is really a waste. But in any case, this is one concern people have, because they know how difficult nominating committee time can be. And so they don't want to, if we're having a hard time filling positions as it is, how can we lose a group of good leaders and still find the people that we need to run the church? This is what I call straw man. You know straw man? You think just this blows down. I've never, ever seen this to be a problem. In fact, what happens is new leaders will step up and fill those positions right away, and people that were not active will move off and become major leaders in the church plant. They were doing nothing in the mother church, and all of a sudden, we didn't know that person had that leadership ability, and there they are leading out in the church plant. So it really engages a lot more people in ministry opportunities. So this one is actually, church planting is actually a great opportunity to replenish and refresh your leadership pool. It's actually very positive. Another one here, moving on, is lack of a kingdom focus. Basically what happens here is a local church is concerned about building up their own structure, their own infrastructure, their own program, and they're not reminding themselves that this local church, not the conference that's down in Newcastle, this local church has a responsibility for this region. This is your territory. This is your God-given responsibility to steward for Him, which means it's this local church that needs to take initiative to go out and start churches in the surrounding regions. That is the responsibility that God has given you. But when we focus on how do we build up our own congregation, how do we prove our own congregation, how do we expand it, and so on, we're really missing that kingdom focus. God's work is a much more global in nature than how a lot of local churches will see it. And you're the ones that have that responsibility for your own neck of the woods that you're in. Continuing here, a lack of health. Many churches are just having such a hard time functioning in any kind of reasonable way at all that the idea of starting another church just doesn't connect because they're not doing so well themselves. All right, so those are some of the excuses that come up. But the good news is that despite obstacles, most churches can be led toward birthing daughter congregations. The key word here is led. And here's what I found. When I first started coordinating church planting for all of Texas, after I planted a couple of churches, I thought that what I need to do is go find a strategically located, established church in a metro area of some sort, lots of population, and just encourage them to start planting churches. But I found out that none of them were interested. So I changed my approach. I went to the pastors, and I started to get the pastors excited about church planting. So they would go back to their churches and lead their churches to plant. For this church to plant a church, your pastor needs to have an interest in planting a church. In fact, help take the initiative and the lead, not that they're the ones planting necessarily themselves, but the lead in that process of putting this thing forward. Pastors, I found, are the gatekeepers for church planting. So you can get a group of members that are excited about planting, but if their pastor's not excited about it, it's not going to go anywhere. And so that is one thing I'd really challenge you with as you're looking at, a shift in pastoral leadership. You need to be asking the pastor coming in, if you're interested in planting as a congregation, where do you stand with church planting? Are you willing to lead out an initiative towards planting? That would be something you'd want to be asking about. All right, next one here. The effort to create an atmosphere of support for church planting in the mother church will reap rewards for decades. So we want to plow the ground in the established church, the mother church, so that the atmosphere is right to launch a church plant. Now, question is, with the resistance that I was facing, could I have gone forward with the church plant? What do you think? Oh, I could have, because that's what they called me there for, right? Say, look, the conference called me here to do this. When I interviewed, it was my understanding that the church was going to be committed to this, and I'm going to move forward with this thing. Anybody who wants to join me, let's go. I could have done that, but what damage would that have done on the mother church? They would say, we never want to think about church planting ever again. Don't even bring it up. We're not going there. And so we could have burned the soil there. We could have ruined our opportunities. So we created an atmosphere where the situation was very, very different. In fact, that same elder, 14 months later, we were in an elders meeting. He said, Pastor, this will be the first of many church plants this church is involved in. So 14 months later, we were ready. We had a preparation process we went through, and there was not only support, there was enthusiastic support for church planting. So here's one church with 415 people attending. When we launched our church plant, we had 550 people attending on the opening Sabbath of the church plant. Now, how's that possible? 90 people from the church had committed and said, hey, we're willing to go and be a part of this church. And yet when we had opening Sabbath, we had 550 people in attendance. It's a little bit of a trick question. These are real numbers. What do you think happened? Well, if we look at the map here, there weren't any other Adventist churches in this whole area. This was empty right here. Lots of population, no Adventist churches. There's one over in here and one over in here and up here. But in that corridor, there weren't any other Adventist churches. And yet 550 people attend opening Sabbath. I don't even to this day know who brought the idea. It may have been me, it may have been one of the elders. But somebody brought the idea, let's close down the mother church, the established church. Let's shut down completely on Sabbath morning and go celebrate the birth of our daughter church. Can you imagine a church that size saying, let's shut down? There was a person in the parking lot handing out a map so that those that didn't get the word ahead of time could make the trip up to where the church plant was happening, which was about 10 miles away, 15-minute drive. The mother church shut down. It was absolutely amazing. So 550 people attending an opening Sabbath. By the way, the second, 90 people were committed, but the second Sabbath at the church plant, we had 140 people in attendance. So we picked up even beyond the 90. But the mother church was still full. It still seemed full the following Sabbath. We still had parking problems like we had before. We're thinking, did we really just plant a church with 140 people now gone? It was quite remarkable. That Sabbath afternoon, the church plant returned to the mother church, and we burned the mortgage. The church, we celebrated the church being actually debt-free on that Sabbath afternoon. One of the biggest obstacles I discovered was the fact that every time that the church would be about out of debt, they would need to enter into a new expansion program, build a new school, remodel the church, some of these kind of things. And so in their 40-year history, they'd never, ever been debt-free. And so when I heard that that was a major objection to church planting, I said, well, let's become debt-free then. Let's pay the debt off. So in that 14 months, we paid off $250,000 debt. And I don't believe anybody gave more than around $10,000, any one person. It was a widespread participation among the church. And so when we were debt-free, then the daughter church, the church plant came back and said, let's celebrate the fact that we're debt-free. I still remember right around Christmas time, we were about ready to pay it off, and two financially capable men met in the foyer, and they said, after the offering today, whatever's left, let's split it 50-50. So I knew we were going to make it. It was so exciting because we had this church plant date, launch date set, and we wanted to be debt-free before it happened, and we were able to do that 2 or 3 weeks before we actually launched the church plant. So that was quite exciting. The parking lot and the church were full at the mother church the Sabbath after we planted. In fact, we began to have momentum towards planting. We actually had a video camera in the fellowship hall. So we had 2 worship services and a video camera in the fellowship hall. Sometimes 50 people be in the fellowship hall watching the worship service on a video camera as we built momentum to planting the church. So once we launched, we didn't have to do the video camera anymore. But in terms of the church facility itself, it was full still. And we still had the parking problems. We actually did some valet parking. We did some very creative things to be able to keep growing while we waited to plant because we had this preparation process that needed to still happen. This one was the most startling to me. The mother church had a tithe gain of almost $167,000 the year that we planted. So they sent 90 people away officially, and in that year had a tithe gain of almost $167,000. You would expect some loss, right? Or maybe we say, okay, if we add the church plant together with the mother church, then we could maybe see a gain, perhaps, if God really blessed us, right? But no, in addition, there was the church plant's tithe that was in addition to the mother church having a gain of almost $167,000. How is that possible? Friends, I want to share with you something about church life. Many people try to operate the church like a business. What the bottom line is. Does this make sense from a business perspective? Friends, the church is not a business. We are a spiritual organism, okay? We are a living body. All of the illustrations in the church, of the church, are living illustrations, not some institution or some corporation. And so when I go to church board meetings and I see members try to say, hey, that doesn't add up, or we can't do that, that won't work, these are the wrong ways to communicate. If something looks too impossible for humans, we need to see if it's too impossible for God, right? Is this something that God can multiply and bless? Because I found when we're faithful to what God calls the church to do and be, God will bless us more than we can imagine. And so when that mother church lost nothing for planting, we actually gained, and we had benefits from planting. The year before we planted, we had 45 baptisms. The year we planted, we had 46 baptisms. That was combined with both churches. But God blessed with fruit. Our attendance actually went up by 100 during that period of time as well. So we had a lot of unchurched people attending as well. Some people from a few other churches were driving a long ways to come be. People want to be a part of a place where God is working. I believe every Seventh-day Adventist wants to be so excited about their church they can hardly wait to come on Sabbath morning because they know God is going to do something powerful. But we need to start running the church like a spiritual body, not like a business. And many of you are business folk, and it's hard to separate those two concepts sometimes. But spiritual things are spiritually discerned. And we need to stretch ourselves sometimes. And this elder that was so resistant, he was so weak in faith. I had to really keep stretching him the whole time we were there. You know, look how God blessed us last time we stepped out. Is it possible he might bless again this time? And so I continued to really stretch him. He's now the head elder of the church and has been for a number of years. But it was really an incredible thing. Now, how did we get to this number? There was immediately after we planted, almost within the next couple of months, I noticed there was a $30,000 increase in tithe. Because I checked every month to see what the tithe report was, how much had come in. And I thought, this is very interesting. Wow, God is really blessing us with this church plant. The next month, 30,000 high again. So I go to the treasurer and I said, look, what's going on? Why are we up $30,000 in tithe? He says, well, there's this one guy that last month turned in a $30,000 check. This month he turned in another one. I said, wow, that's interesting. The next month, another 30,000 increase. So I went to the treasurer. I said, give me the name of the guy. I want to meet him. I want to tell him about offerings, the local church offerings. So I got his name and address, showed up at his house. He wasn't there. His wife was there. She greeted me. It was, gated community. Nice home, not luxurious, but very nice. And she said, he'll give you a call. And so he called me up and said, hey, let's have lunch together. Guess who paid for lunch? He paid for lunch. Very nice place. And we visited for a little while. It just seems that he had a transfer there just recently. Really was very low profile in this church with 400 to 500 people attending. We didn't even know who he was. I mean, I'm sure people were friendly with him, but he didn't try to make himself stand out with his money or anything. At that lunch, he handed me a check for $93,000 and said, this is my year-end tithe. And I think of the 93, I think 3,000 was offering. But anyway, I called up the conference and I said, look, I have a check here for $93,000 and I think it's a good check. I think this will actually cash out at the bank. And it was amazing. So this one man brought in $180,000 of tithe in that 1 year and gave also for local church offerings. And we didn't suffer with our offerings either for the local church operations. So that was a tremendous blessing. As quick as he came, he actually left after that year. But I took it as God's hand of blessing saying, look, I am with this. Because what it did is it got the conference really excited about church planting. Because they function on the financial well-being of the conference. And they say, church planting is not hurting us. It's actually helping us as a conference. Then the church also became committed to being a birthing congregation. As the elders said, this will be the first of many church plants this congregation does. So here are the church plants now in the same area after 10 years. Here's the original mother church right here. The mother church planted in Plano, and that church actually relocated up here and bought about 10 acres of land in a very affluent area. And they have a really effective ministry, 2 worship services. They've been reaching some affluent people. In fact, they're in a community where the minimum land that you can own is 1 acre. So these huge mansions are being built right around where that church is located. Just an incredible ministry, absolutely beautiful facility. So that's where that one ended up. Then, the next year, what happened is we had a Spanish group that was sitting in the choir loft for Sabbath school, about 15 Spanish-speaking folk. And I had a sense that God had more in mind than just 15 people in the choir loft. And I began wondering and praying whether God may want us to plant a Spanish church. someone contacted me. I didn't know him previously. His name's Victor Jager. Victor said, Tom, I would like to plant a Spanish church in Richardson. Would you be interested in helping me? I said, I've been praying about it. Let's do it. So we began talking about it. I said, let's try one Sabbath in the fellowship hall and see how many people come. So we had opening Sabbath for our Spanish, it was a test run, right? We're not planting yet. We're just testing the waters to see what the response will be. 40 people showed up. They said, can we do this more often? So I said, let's do it every other week. Then they said after the next one, I said, can we do this every week? Within 5 months, they had 100 people attending the fellowship hall. When they launched into their new facility, which was a miracle in itself, just a couple blocks down from the mother church, a church that wanted to use some of our space and allowed us to use their 750-seat congregation for free because they thought they might want to use a couple classrooms at our church, which they never used. After a few months, they caught on and started charging us a little rent. But when they launched in there, they had 150 people attending on their opening Sabbath, just 5 months after this idea of should we plant a Spanish church. This individual, somebody that I discipled and I journeyed with very closely, Victor, the lay planter, in his first 3 years of full-time ministry, he baptized 261 people. And we thought we had a ministry by having 15 people in the choir loft. God had something much bigger and better in mind. I didn't know Victor was capable of this kind of result, but it's not Victor. It's a man who's completely dependent on God and is willing to be used by God. Victor has become a very close friend, and we communicate all the time, one of my closest friends. But Victor had a vision to plant an English church. I said, Victor, you can't do it. You have too much of an accent, your experiences with the Spanish culture. It's very different to plant an English church than a Spanish church. No, I want to plant a English church. I said, Victor, I don't think you can do it. Keep planting Spanish churches. I was at Victor's, I have a picture I showed at the pastor's meeting. But, he had his English church started, and I was there, and they had 75 people in attendance in an English church with a guy that has a very, very bad accent and doesn't pronounce his words right. But he loves the Lord and has a passion. And he's working on his accent, and he came to Australia with me, paid his own way to come. When I came to Australia last time, he and his wife came. He paid the whole expense to be able to travel with me. And he got up and shared stories with the pastor. I don't think anybody understood what he was saying, but he laughed a lot, and they laughed when he laughed, and it was a lot of fun. But, now he wants to get his doctorate. He sees what I'm doing, and he wants to do it, and it's just exciting to work with Victor. And so he planted this Spanish church right over here. Well, this Spanish church decided, hey, we have a Brazilian, Portuguese-speaking Sabbath school class. Let's turn that into a church plant. So they launched a church plant right over here that was Brazilian and Brazilian-speaking that ended up locating closer to this area right here eventually. So that's that one. Then the English church decides they're going to plant again, and they've now planted up in Frisco, an English church, another very, very affluent area, dynamic church plant. Incidentally, they're very focused on children and reaching children in the community, and they have a lot of activities that way, but they have the best announcements of any church in the world field that I've ever seen. They have somebody who has studio experience, and he pre-records in the studio the announcements for the church with video, with pictures up on the screen, and with music. And so the announcements, rather than being the dead time, the most boring part of the worship service, have become the most exciting part of the worship service. Everybody wants to stay to hear the announcements, right? So how creative, just somebody saying, hey, we can do something better with this. But that's one of those church plants. And by the way, they have, which is something I've encouraged for a lot of years, they do a bread ministry for their guests. So anybody who's a guest, they'll stand up on Sabbath morning, and they don't make the guests stand. We don't do that, right? We don't make people stand and introduce themselves. But they'll prepare loaves of bread and package them professionally. They'll put what the ingredients are in them. And they'll say, if you're a guest with us, we have some children that are going to go down the aisle of the church right now. If you're a guest, raise your hand as they come by, and we want to give you a free loaf of bread. It can be a fruit bread, a nut bread, any kind of bread. Now, the guest will self-identify themselves because they want to get this loaf of bread, right? So who do you tell the members to be friendly with? Anybody packing a loaf of bread? They say, I've never been to such a friendly church. I was swarmed with people afterwards, right? It's brilliant. So we have a number of churches that are doing this now. Wouldn't it be great for you to be the first church in Australia to do that? I mean, already have the best potluck in the Adventist church, right? You might as well, take this gift and take it to another level. What does it take? It takes 2 or 3 people in the church saying, we can do that as our ministry. And those individuals will become passionate about it because they know a good Sabbath is based on how many loaves of bread you give away. So here they are up here. This one's in Frisco. The Spanish church then plants another church right over here. Actually, they planted one into Plano that relocated up here, bought a facility together with another church up here. Then they started an English church. And then Richardson planted another English church up here. That one's more recent that's been planted. This is an African church right here that was started from over in here but moved into this area. And this is another Spanish church that was over in this area, moved into the area. So, we have several English churches, an African, a Brazilian, and then some Spanish church plants as well. So it was just amazing how God blessed with this. So we went from one church with 415 people in attendance to 11 churches with close to 2,000 people in attendance. Now, I want to give you a statistic that I had to do this as part of my doctoral work because you have to prove, that your strategy is working and statistically that it's sound research and all of these kind of things. And then I have to, we have my document online on our website with the North American Division. You can go on and it's for free. Just take it. We want you to use it and learn from it. But one of the things we study is say, well, what about the baptisms? Because if this is a growing area, there's probably new Adventists moving into the area, right? If this is a growth area, if these cities are growing, if this is the safest place in America for large cities, right? So we took those baptism numbers and we wondered what kind of percentage growth are we experiencing in this area? What is the fastest growing division in our world field? Where's the Adventist church growing the fastest? Australia, right? No? Europe? America? Asia, okay. Asia? Where do you think? Central America. Nobody said Africa yet. There we go, Africa. No, the correct answer is South America. South America. What is an excellent growth rate? Church growth experts say around 10% conversion growth. We're not discounting those that have left apostasy, as we would call it, or through death. Simply, what percentage of new baptisms are added over the previous year? So if you have a church of 100, if you add 10 people, you've had a 10% conversion growth rate, right? In terms of 10 baptisms. Yeah, all right? So 10% is actually considered to be a very good number. The South American division, in the year of evangelism designated for the whole world field, the General Conference designated 2009 as the year of evangelism for the world field. And there was a big bump in baptisms during that year across the world field. The South American division, for the whole division that year, came just under 10% for the growth rate in terms of baptism growth. Where did we end up in North Dallas? Take a look at this. Between 2002 and 2010, you can see the big spike in 2009, right, where we really had that emphasis, the year of evangelism. We had 1,257 baptisms just in that corridor that we showed you where all the dots are at, right? Notice this. The 9-year average was 10.76%, higher than the growth rate in the South American division during the year of evangelism. And this, my friends, is in an affluent area in North America. I did not foresee that God would do all this with simply being faithful and saying, let's plant a church. But not only let's plant a church, let's plant another one, and maybe some of those churches that we're planting will also start planting churches. And they're still in the mode of planting churches today. I was called to the Texas conference office to coordinate church planting after those first 2 church plants. And in 9 years, we planted 114 churches that are functioning and moving forward. We planted a lot more than that, but some of them closed down. You always have. We probably planted about 130, but 114 were still functioning. We had an 87% vitality, or churches actually still going after 4 years. So 87% success rate in terms of churches continuing to function. So here's some additional impacts. That new school that was so needed for the mother church actually did open. on an off-site facility and has a large attendance, a K-12 school. We actually have 6 new pastors in the conference that are in that church planting network of churches. We also had, of the 114 church plants, over half of them were led by lay people. So we have lay-led churches as well. Because the church planting gift is not necessarily connected with the role of a pastor or a full-time pastor. There's a certain DNA, and basically that DNA is somebody who's an entrepreneur. If you're always starting new things, starting things over here, and you're allow God's Holy Spirit to work in you, you're a converted person. God can use that entrepreneurial gift you have for you to actually lead a church plant. God can use anybody in this room to be part of a church planting team, but the leader should have that entrepreneurial gift set. It will be much easier for them to plant that church because church planting is very difficult work. In fact, the Apostle Paul said when he was planting in Philippi, he said, outside were conflicts, inside were fears. So basically saying, is this thing going to work? What's going to happen? And then you're faced with outside opposition as well. It's not easy work. But I can tell you, church planting, I have never seen more miracles in my life than when I'm engaged in frontline church planting, nor have I seen the enemy attack more directly. So if you're needing supernatural interaction and experiences in your life, become involved in church planting, and you're going to see God do amazing things. Here's my contact information, and what I thought now we could do is to open up for what questions you might have. Ideally, what I'd like to do is have you in groups of about 3 or 4 discuss just for a minute, and as a group, determine what question you'd like to ask. That way we can have some variety of input across the room. And I'll shut this off now, and I don't know if we want to record the question time. We do want to do that? Okay, the pastor has the microphone, and we want to take several intentional questions. I could do 4 or 5 days of training with no problem. We have a 30-hour class on church planting that we teach at the seminary. Not only that class, but we have seeds conferences, church planting conferences. We have a church plant coaching class that we teach. So there's a lot more material, but I just want to give you a little background of my experiences with it. To encourage a large-sized church, the impact that you can make is greater than you might think in terms of being faithful with church planting. Okay, let's see what questions they have. All right. You're one of the cooks, right?
Yes, not the main cook. Anna Marshall is the main cook, and she's really good. And Jane Nylon, who you're staying with. We were just wondering how you find out who the first 90 people or whoever the first group of people is that goes to plant the new church.
Good. And I didn't think I was going to use the screen anymore, but when you asked that question, let me see what I can do here. I'm going to pull something up here because there's 5 qualities that I like to look for in a... Let me see if I can pull this quickly. Let's see if it will come up properly. I was just looking at this again today. Can we see it, or is it a little off? That works? It's good enough? Okay, here are the 5 qualities I look for in a core team to plant a church. Okay? I want the team to have a shared passion. You don't want to bring in people that are really not too excited about doing this. You want people to be passionate about it. And we want that passion to be on the mission of the church. Sometimes churches are planted because, hey, we don't like the pastor we have, or we want a different worship style, or we want to be more conservative, or we want to be more liberal, or we want different kind of food. There's all sorts of reasons. We want a different theology, different twist on Adventist theology of some sort. We want people to be planting because they want to reach lost people. So those are the people we're looking for in our team. The next one here is individuals who are a magnet to others. This again is your core team. Some people are just by nature tend to repel people away, right? And if you have those as your heart and soul of your core team, you're going to have a hard time We had a man that would carry around a vial filled with green liquid, and he had the smell of garlic on his breath all the time, and he would just corner people. If that man was on our core team, we'd have some difficulty, right? You want people that other people like. They like to be around. They're welcoming. They're friendly. The next one here, individuals who match the demographic to be reached. If this group was planning to reach out to surfers, then you need to have surfers on your core team, right? Say, hey, we want to plant a church to reach surfers, and we're going to be right down there where they hang out. That's what we're going to do. Then your core team needs to be surfers. We've talked about, my wife and I, about doing a ministry to reach single moms. And I knew right away that in our core team we need to have some single moms, right? If we're going to be effective at reaching them. So if you want to reach collegiate students, don't go in there with a group of 40 to 50-year-olds, you know? You may have one or two that are kind of some stability that can open their home and be welcoming or whatever. But you need to have in your core team collegiates, right? University students, if that's who you're trying to reach. People connect with what they see. They relate to with what they are familiar with. And so as you look at planting a church, you need to understand who are the people that live in this place you're wanting to plant a church. And make sure that the core team reflects that. And then the final one is individuals who are loyal to the denomination. You don't want to have any questions regarding whether people actually believe what the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches. You don't want any iffy gray areas on this kind of thing. Your core leaders need to be really solid on that. So these are the 5 areas that we find to be essential for your core team. The core team is between 8 and 12 individuals that actually put the whole strategy together for the church plant. They plan the whole thing. Once they've planned it, which takes several months, and by the way, I have a manual here that maybe some of you have seen that is a workbook for that core team. You just work through this, page by page. It has every step that you need to go through preparation. Once you've got your strategy together, hey, this is where we're planting. We're going to be renting this place over here. This is our start date. Then you begin to open up the net and say, who else would like to join us? And one way to do that is through informational meetings, where, let's say, a Sabbath after lunch, that core team meets and they put their strategy up on the, for everybody to see it and say, this is why we're doing it. This is who we're going to be reaching. These are our core values. This is what our vision is. And they invite others that are interested to come and join them. That you want a pastor who will give a fishing license to that core team to say you can recruit anybody in this church who wants to go and be a part of it. And when we did that, we found 90 people were willing, which was exciting. It doesn't have to be that many people, but you probably should not rent a place until you have at least 25 adults that are committed to be a part of it. I wouldn't rent a facility and start meeting weekly until that time.
Just a follow-up question on that, Tom. How do you, say no to people who don't fit any of those, but is absolutely insistent on being part of a core team? Or even expand that in part of being a church plant, and there's a chance that they'll be disruptive, there's a chance that they don't believe or any of those things, really. How would you address that?
Yeah, I wouldn't put them on the core team. I'd just let them know that we're going to be opening this up after the core team is prepared. Once the church launches and starts, everybody's welcome. And so I would put them off on that point. And if they show up after it starts and they're disruptive, then what I do is I hold people accountable for their behavior. I don't try to make them, an attack on a person personally. Say, when you act in this way, this person was hurt by what you did. And people get tired of hearing that. And they decide, either they're going to fix what they're doing or they're going to go somewhere else. And I found that to be pretty consistently the response. And usually they end up going somewhere else. But sometimes they'll fix themselves. And that's the greatest blessing for everybody, isn't it? Yeah. But we had to corner this guy. Every time we did evangelistic meetings, I'd assign somebody to keep him occupied during the whole meeting so he wouldn't interact with anybody. Because it would be a loss for the church. But also we still had to love this guy. God loves him, and he wasn't intentionally trying to be. He just didn't know better and was making a nuisance of himself. Yeah. Okay. Good question. Is that clear now? That's very interesting. Who pays for it? There's a lot of research that talks about how much do we support financially church plants. And it is, because of our system, let's say the conference were to hire a church planter to come in and plant, any other denomination is going to have to pay the salary of that church planter. So that right there is tremendous support. That's huge. Thousands and thousands. That's a full salary that's being supported by our church organization. Now, most conferences can only do a few of those kind of plants every year, right? Because it takes a little while for those church plants to have enough finances to actually justify the salary of the pastor. And we need to recognize this is a huge benefit for our system that we have as Seventh-day Adventist that other churches don't have. But what I found is that money, I've never seen money to be an inhibitor to church planting. What you want to do when your core group starts coming together is put a line item in your church budget and allow that core group to begin giving financially to that designated line in the church budget. And as they begin doing that, then some funds are in place when they launch. The other thing that they can do is you can take up an offering during a worship service at the mother church. Also like to see the mother church have a dedication service a couple weeks before the launch. That would be a good time to take up an offering. Our church decided we'd give $5,000 to the church plant. It wasn't much. But with the large core that they had plenty of resources. And here's what I found. Sometimes we say, well, resources are a problem. We need this much money. We need that much money. If you don't think you have enough money, pray that God will provide a miracle. We ended up with a huge facility for $1,000 a month. Now, I know churches that can rent and pay $9,000 to $12,000 a month to be able to get something that they can use. But God chose to provide us with a blessing and a miracle. So this is, in church planting, we have to become very God-dependent. And one area is in the area of finances. We have to be very God-dependent. So again, it's 8 to 12 adults that you need to incubate your core team. And you want to meet in a home on a weekly basis to begin working through this manual, basically. This is about Adventist church planting. And there's other resources I recommend in here. So it's not just my own resource, but other resources.
Where can we get a hold of that manual?
Justin has some of these, I think. Yeah, he has some extras. Yep. And you want one for each one of your core team. Yes. Yes, our Bible worker.
When do you know if the church is ready to start a church plant, and how do you go about finding those 8 to 12 key people?
Okay, boy, those are two questions. There are a few things I do to prepare the church to plant. The first one is what I did this morning, and that's actually number 2 on this, is preach sermons regarding the church's mission and passion for the lost on a regular basis. I just started working through Scripture on these kind of passages until my elders are actually up front praying for our community, praying for people that we need to reach, and I realized they've finally gotten it. The other thing is we focus on becoming healthy. Where's your NCD score right now? Do you know? Your average?
We just took the new test. We just sent it off. We haven't got those results back. A few years ago, we did it, and we were, what was our percentage? 63? I think it was 63. That was the first time we'd ever done it.
Your average was 63?
Yes.
Now, again, that's not a percentage. That's a norm, where 50 is average.
Right.
So 65 and above puts you in the top 15% of churches in Australia. Okay, so if you're to 63, that's extremely healthy. The other thing you want to watch is your balance between your highest area and your lowest area. You don't want that to be greater than 15. But these are all things your conference knows and you as a church know. When we first took the survey, we were to 47. And after 14 months, we moved to a 59 before we planted. So I think a church needs to be above 50 in terms of church health to plant. So I'd say once you're there, and most of the objections have been met, what we did is we took a vote in a business meeting. We had about 100 people came out to a business meeting. The elders had already approved the idea of planting a church. The church board had already approved it. I've been preaching about a passion for lost people. The church had become healthier. We went to this business meeting and on the agenda to plant a church. And right away, as soon as I opened the floor for discussion, this group of ladies said, we need a new church school. That wasn't on the agenda. What they were saying was very true, but we had just been hanging on for this church plant to start. We were in the fellowship hall with a video screen. We were valet parking cars. We were doing everything we could to keep growing, and now we're saying, how now we need a new school first. Well, how long is that going to take, right? So fortunately, and this is one of the other 5 steps, I had spent significant time investing in one of the elders who had a lot of influence. Not that first one that said, I don't want to hear another word, but a different one that had as much or more influence as that elder. And so he raised his head and said, Pastor, I'd like to say something. He said, ladies, I promise you we will have a new church school. But right now we need to plant a church. I said, okay, let's vote. We voted, it was unanimous. Because I knew that man had influence for the whole congregation. And if he was for it, he had enough people that would follow him. And if there was anybody dissenting, he would get them straightened out. So that helped. We followed a really logical, good process to move forward. Now, in terms of how do you recruit your team, I basically, as the church planter, and I believe your conference would be open to this, to say, would you send us a church planter that can embed here with our congregation, and we promise within 1 year, we will send them out with a group to plant a church. I think this is the best way to plant a church. It's absolutely, you look at, there's New Testament models of churches that were sending churches. Now, what's going to happen is your church is going to get attached to that person because they're going to be a gifted and talented person. But you need to recognize they're not coming for the behalf of this local church, but for the extension of your ministry in the surrounding communities, right? So you're going to need to bless them and release them. But that person is given a fishing license. So they're going to sit down with a senior pastor and say, I'm really connecting with this person. Would they be a good core group member? What do you think? And then approach them and say, would you carefully pray about whether God might want you to be a part of this church plant? Some people may pray about it and say, no, we don't. Others may pray about it and say, not only do we want to, we're passionate. Sign us up now. Let's go. And so really we were able to create a team of about 12 to 18 people that met for several months working through our plans. And that was done grassroots, by invitation. We definitely didn't hand out, cards and say who wants to be part of the church plant as our first step. We individually recruited people based on, some of it's maybe people who live there, but that may not always be the right person. One of the reasons we plant churches is we want people to be able to minister where they live. So one way you decide where you plant is see where do we have a lot of members living where we have no church. That can maybe be a way to start. But there may be some that still want to drive here, and that's no problem. We don't want to force people into a church plant. We want people to feel called into a church plant. Follow up on that? Okay. Anybody else? There must be some questions back here. I see you. Ready for your question?
How do you decide? Sorry. No, I don't like that. I don't like these things. How do you decide what the church plan is going to look like? And I'm going to do what my daughter did and ask a second question. And what does it open as a full church? Does it open with a full service like we do here? How does it look?
I'm glad you asked that because there's something I run into time and time again that's a problem with church plants. And that's they're trying to act bigger than their size. It's much better for a church plant to say, who is it that we're trying to reach? And I like to do that in a retreat setting. Now, I didn't do it that way with the church plant we did, the first one. But if you were to take a retreat with your team of 12 to 18 people and say, who is it that God is calling us to reach? The book of Nehemiah chapter 1, Johnny Wong is the one that really I heard share this, said that there's 3 things that he highlights about church planting. Every person needs to have a people group. Who is it that in common this group feels a passion for reaching? And then the second one is prayer, and the third one, he says, is personal sacrifice. This will take personal sacrifice on your part as a core group member. So as a group, you decide what the church plant's going to look like. What will the worship style be? And that's going to be determined by who it is you're trying to reach, right? What will our outreach methods be? So here's what I like church plants to do. I would like you to choose 1, maybe 2 ministries that you're going to do with excellence, that you're going to do very well. And focus on those things. Don't try to act like a big church when you're small. But when you start doing something really well, guess what? It starts to attract people. Excellence honors God and inspires people. God wants us to give our best. But when we do, people are inspired. It's like the fellowship meal we had today. That was done with excellence. Those that cooked really put things together well. They planned the meal well. And I'm inspired, right? But it honors God when we do our best. When you just throw a few things together and toss it on the table, who's inspired by that? So decide what ministries you'll focus on. I can give you several examples. One is a church plant by David Jameson. It's the Alder Grove Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's not a church plant, it's an established church. He's been the pastor there for 12 years. They are known for acts of kindness. They do ministry to help needs in the community. They provide minivans for single moms. They do oil changes for single moms. They do extreme home makeover for a home that's dilapidated. They'll go in and they'll recruit businesses in the area to help them put together a renovation at home. Now, not every church can do that. But if you say our church plant is going to exist to meet the needs of the community we're planting in, the physical needs of that community through acts of kindness, you can do that. That one thing you can do. But if you want to do that and you want to have the best Pathfinder Club and you want to have the youth group that's going on outings all the time, it's too much. You have to focus. We have another church plant that say teenagers, that teenage group, 13 to 18. That is our focus, period. That's who we're after. Any adult that's here has to be after those teenagers as well. That's where we're focused. So here's what they do. They rent a gymnasium because they don't have that in their church. They rent a gymnasium.
A hall.
Yeah, they rent a gymnasium every other Saturday night. They open it up for basketball, for volleyball, because the people they're trying to reach, those are the two sports they like the most. They have a worship every time before that meeting. They baptize teens that come for basketball and volleyball. Then they say, we're going to provide musical instrument lessons, free music instrument lessons for any teenager that wants to learn to play an instrument. They'll get free lessons and a free instrument. Can a church do that? Absolutely. They've created an ensemble that even does tours of all teenagers, musicians, because they say, we're about teenagers. Guess what? They have Pathfinders because it's after teenagers. They have an AOI program, Sabbath afternoon program for the youth, where the youth lead out in it because they're all about teenagers. Just straight down the line, they said that's who we're after. Are the adults happy there? Absolutely. They're happy because their teens are in the church, right? So that's a focus that church has. We could go down the line to Johnny Wong down in Melbourne. What does Johnny Wong have? He has care groups. The whole church, if you want to be a part of this church, you need to be in a care group, period. That's what that church is about. So again, you need to decide where will you focus. And I think every established church needs to do that and say, what is our niche that we can do with such a level of excellence that it will attract people? For example, if you say, hey, food's our niche. And I'm not suggesting that's what it should be, but it's so good that you're working out of your strength. What if you have food in between Sabbath school and church for 20 minutes every Sabbath, healthy snacks for people? Fellowship meals every single Sabbath, where you have banquets that you invite the community to come to. You can use food as your evangelistic tool to reach people by doing it with excellence. So that's really what I say, focus. Become focused. We as Adventists are really good at trying to think we can reach everybody and we reach nobody. When we get focused, then we reach a very particular group. They'll come, they'll be passionate, and they'll bring others. And those that are participating in that ministry are happy because they're getting results. We get burned out when there's no results, when there's a lack of results, and when we don't have input. When things are just done and there's no ownership. So when we don't have ownership and there's no results, we get burned out. When we're seeing that we've been a part of the decision and there's results coming, we're on fire. We're excited about it. Okay. Any others? We probably had time for a few more. I know it's Sabbath afternoon. It's hard to stay alert all the way through. You know if there's another question, it'll be a 10-minute answer and you're ready to go, right? One more over here. Good. There's a church planter, I can tell already.
I just wanted to say thank you to Adele McGrath for the beautiful food that she made.
Where's she at?
Just here. She made the dessert, that
She's been
lovely
raptured.
cheesecake.
Oh, okay.
And John O'Nylon, who made the other dessert. Thank you.
That's very delicious. Which dessert was it she made? See, I think I tried everything. You know? That was very nice. That was very nice. Okay. Anything else before we conclude? Our mature collegiate here.
How does church planting, like from what you've heard, normally go in Australia?
Good. I hear.
I know it'd be very different to America, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh no, and I've been 8 times working with England on church planting and church health. So I've had a lot, and they're doing some fantastic things over in England, North and South England, which would probably be more similar culture. But also Canada would be more similar to you than the United States would be. And I've worked with Manitoba Saskatchewan Conference and also Alberta Conference, where there's a lot of church planting happening. I think one of the keys is in these countries, we tend to be pastor dependent. And so anytime a country is pastor dependent, they tend to want to wait for the pastor to kind of tell them what to do. If we're going to move forward, we need the pastor to tell us what we should do. When it comes to church planting, it can be very healthy if that's lay-driven, working in cooperation and with the support of the pastor. You don't have to have the conference send you somebody to plant a church here. It would be a blessing if they did, but if they didn't, there's a lay person that's very capable of planting a church within this congregation. I have no question, there's many lay people in this church that could plant a church. And what we do for that is we provide a coaching system where the local pastor becomes a coach to help that lay person be successful. So I hear great things about Western Australia and the church planting that's happening there. But I can tell you that in this conference, there are some church plants. I was at one this last weekend that is in, trying to think the one I was at with Mike. It's called My House. Yeah. And they have, I think, 60 to 70, 80 people coming, and a really nice ministry. I saw some very solid things happening there. I saw some areas they could improve in. I think anytime we plant, we need a coach. And I think that will make church planting better in any culture, where you have somebody from the outside that's able to come in and give you some feedback. Because I saw, probably half dozen things that they could improve on. Nobody asked me whether what input do you have. It was a great opportunity to do that, but I talked with Pastor Justin about it. I let him know. But I saw a lot of things I liked too. So I think that's the key for any culture is you need to have the coaching element. That outside support really helps church planters tremendously. We've done some things even with networks where we'll get groups of church planters together on a monthly basis to pray together and to share and say, hey, what's working, what's not working. Because you need to learn what works in your context. If I come and try to plant a church like an American, I may run into a few surprises, right? But if I'm following biblical principles, then we should be on solid ground. And so I've tried to make this manual principle-based, not so much to one culture. Because this is why natural church development is so successful, is because it's based on principles that are universal. So yeah, there are universal principles for church planting. The two keys we really had is if you have a mother church and if you have a coach, the chance of your success is almost 100%. Those are the two areas that we really felt were the most important. So you've got a mother church here that's a warm. See, we say there's three types of church plant. There's cold, warm, and hot. A cold start is where you send somebody in the middle of nowhere with no people and no money, and you say, start a church. That's Adventist Frontier Missions, right? We do that kind of planting, but it's very slow. The hot start is where there's been a fight, or the people leave and there's conflict, and there's hot tempers, kind of thing going. So that's the idea of a hot start. And that one is very painful, and it takes a couple years for the groups to even recover, if they ever do. The warm start, where it's like wrapping a warm blanket around a baby in the hospital, and having a baby shower. That's the kind of church plant you want to have happen. And when you do that, and then you add the element of a coach and a church and a core team that's compatible with each other with a church planter, you're going to have success. We had one more over there.
So with the church plants that are successful, how many are unsuccessful, and what are the key factors that make the ones that are unsuccessful?
Wow, I have a whole 2-hour presentation on that because that is a great question. I won't give the whole presentation. We had an 87% success rate. Outside of Adventism in the United States, the success rate is 68%. So we had a much higher success rate than even outside of Adventism. So we're very excited about that. And as I mentioned, the two keys were a coach and a mother church. The other one is a healthy DNA, which comes from a healthy church. So if you're planted out of a healthy church, your chances of success are much higher. Another problem that we found is church plants that launch too quickly, where they just say, hey, in a month we're going to start a new church, we'll be worshiping over here. That's not enough time. Marriages where somebody meets someone and the next weekend they're married, they're headed for a few surprises, aren't they? because only time can show you the compatibility issues and some of these things. So you need that core group to really be gelled and to be clear what they're about. That raises a level. And then I would say, if somebody is putting we have a phrase, all their eggs in one basket. Do you have that phrase? Yeah. So if they say, this is the one approach we're going to try with this new cutting-edge evangelistic approach, we're going to try it, and we're going to make everything depend on our success of whether that one approach works. That's, again, I said we need to decide what we were going to do well, right? We need to be focused. But we still need to be giving personal Bible studies. We need to have our members still working with their friends through friendship evangelism. So we can't leave off those proven methods that we know work because we want to try this one unique method. Now, I know of a church planter who did that. His church plant was a prayer house. And I told him, he tells me I told him it won't work. I probably did, but I don't remember it. But it worked with a very small level of success. By the time he left 4 years later, there were 25 people. And the conference had put literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into the project between his salary, and it was actually partnered with the North American division. But I felt he was too narrow in what he was trying to do, and that limited his success. So we had to bring a new church planter in that was able to take that to another level. But they were pretty frustrated. The members were pretty frustrated after 4 years when they'd had 3 or 4 baptisms. That felt frustrating to the members as well, that this could have gone much better than it did. And where's the point of comparison where you have a church plant in a neighboring community and a similar demographic that's up over 100 people by that in the same amount of time? So, yeah.
Just on that point, what level of discussion should there be with our brother churches in the area? Because just say we're trying to set up a church and the guy's 10 k's down the road or 50 k's down the road.
Yeah.
Should there be some discussion there?
Yeah, and that discussion should come at the level of the pastors. The pastors should be communicating with each other and allow the other pastors to communicate with their congregation. But yeah, there's, particularly when you're in an area where there are a number of other churches, there's value, and I don't know if your pastors here in this area meet on a regular basis, but we try to get the pastors together once a month together, and we want to communicate and pray for each other. But yeah, there'll be some resistance maybe from some of the other churches, but the strength of the plant will be that there is a local church behind it, right? That's where the strength comes. This is a church plant supported by Kingscliff, right? So all the other area churches know that you're supporting it. Now the pastors may want to meet and agree that, hey, there's not going to be any church renting within 3 or 4K or whatever you decide of an already established church. You may decide that you want to not duplicate territories that much, but it may be that you're going after a completely separate demographic in terms of the people you're trying to reach. And so if the pastors understand that and it can be communicated to those congregations, hey, look, we're going after somebody completely different. I was at my vet, and we raise golden retrievers. I was at my vet's office, and I was sharing with them that we're trying to plant a church or do something to reach single moms. They're not even Adventist. They said, our church isn't doing anything for that. If we have single moms come in here with their pets, we'll tell them about your church plant. Because it's a completely different demographic. You may find if you say, hey, we're going to go for surfers, that there's even some other churches that have nothing for that. And if they have somebody that they think might be interested, they'll direct that interest your direction. You may get help from other denominations even. So, we had a relationship going with our pastoral team where if somebody showed up from the community where the church plant was, if they say they show up at Kingscliff and you're planting somewhere else 10 Ks from here, they'd say, brother, family, we're excited that you're here. We love to have you as this church family, but we would not be doing you a service unless we let you know that we have a church plant that's a partner with us that has started over where you live. Now, we'd love for you to go visit them and at least check them out and see if it's a match for your family. If not, we want you right here. But if it is, we want to help encourage their ministry to move forward. That's the kind of relationship you want going on among the churches with this kind of a church planting project. It can be very positive, and it can be a win for everybody. Because guess what? Those pastors, they're going to be moving to different churches eventually anyway. You know, and we really need to have a bigger global picture of God's work than just one local church.
Do you plan a regional, like once a year or once every other year, where all the daughter churches and the mother church all come together as like a family reunion?
We do a Seeds Conference once a year, and we hope that all the church plants come to that. But there are a number of partnerships. In fact, I outlined a number of healthy partnerships that can continue between a mother church and a church plant. One is the sharing of talent. For example, if you invite, who's the guest speaker you have coming soon? David Ashrick, is he coming?
Herb Larson.
Herb Larson's coming soon. Okay. Let's say you've invited Herb Larson to come Kingscliff Church. You have this church plant over here that's 10 Ks away. You know what? You're going to invite them to come, but you may hold one of Herb's meetings over at the church plant. And the mother church goes over there to support the church. Isn't that awesome? You do something like that? And you get to reconnect with your friends. Hey, how's it going? How can we help? What's needed? You can share a Pathfinder club or church school together. That church plant doesn't have to start a Pathfinder club right away or start a church school right away. They can partner with the established church. When the church plant becomes organized as a church or when they dedicate their facility, you want to share those experiences together. You may have a Friday night communion agape feast that's involving the churches together, the mother church and the church plant. You may do something like that every once in a while. You may decide to do an evangelistic series that's a combined effort between the church and the church plants. A social, camping. And then I believe the church plants, until they have their own facilities, should hold the baptisms together with the mother church for the mother church to have an opportunity to celebrate the fruit of what God has done through them planting a church. So there's all sorts of wonderful ways that you can connect and stay interrelated with each other. Yeah.
I suppose from my perspective is if you're to be involved to go to work with the church plant,
yep.
What would the relationship between the members who have left and the members who have stayed behind in the mother church? Because I've heard a couple of different models, it's separate. You're now totally consumed with running that, and you should stay with that at all times. And so, what would be the relationship between those who have separated themselves to go over?
With our children, there's a certain point where we allow them to have more autonomy, right? As they're able to handle that. We partner in the things that I talked about. Those are things we want to continue partnering on for life if we can with each other's. We're going to be stronger together than we are apart. But the mother church in no way should determine the details of how that local church plant is run. From day one, the core team needs to be the one to chart that direction for the church plant in consultation with the pastor. The daughter church is going to look different than the mother church. Our children look different than we do, right? And it will have a different flavor and a different look. But you do want an ongoing relationship. And I believe there's another part to your question I don't want to miss.
The other part was how often, I suppose I was alluding to the point, how often would the people who have started the plant come back to worship with their fellowship group that they've left?
That reminds me of a recommendation I'll make very clearly. The temptation will be to have the church plant meet on Sabbath afternoons. Because you love your church so much, some of you want to stay engaged in the mother church. That will cripple your church plant because you don't know who really truly is committed to the church plant when they finally decide after a couple years of struggling along, hey, we probably should go to Sabbath morning, which they probably will do. I've seen this happen numerous times. They meet Sabbath afternoons and people still go both places. And there's really not that complete commitment. When you're ready to launch on Sabbath morning. That's my recommendation. We say don't ever start earlier than 10 o'clock, which I'm glad you're not doing that here as well. That's you're one of the few established churches that I've seen have reason in that area. Really, 10 o'clock is plenty early to start for church. That's fine. But yeah, let them have that autonomy so that they launch out. When people are committed, we want them to be committed. That this is what, sink or swim, they're committed to this thing. It's going to go because there's going to be some bumps. And by developing your strategy well before that church plant starts, there's no surprises in terms of stylistically. One of the mistakes we made with our church plan is that we never talked about music style. Why? We all thought it would be the same as the mother church was, as a blended contemporary traditional style. We were sure that's how the church plant would be as well. Nobody thought we needed to talk about it. Well, for the first 6 months, we had 3 pastors on our church staff. I was still senior pastor for both for 6 months, and we rotated between the mother church and the church plant. That didn't work either, by the way. You need to have a church planter. So we assigned the church plant to one of my associates, which improved some things, but what it did is he went contemporary with it without there being dialogue. And a lot of people came back to the mother church. Now, they survived it, but if we'd had that discussion before we started, and people kind of knew that the flavor of music is going to be a little more contemporary than the mother church, people coming wouldn't be so surprised, and those that were committed would stay committed, because if they were doing it for the purpose of mission, to actually reach people, then that's a legitimate reason to do it. But if they're doing it because that's the kind of music that we all like, that's probably not a very legitimate reason. So those things all need to be dialogued ahead of time, so you don't get an exodus back to the mother church and say, look what they're doing over there, we don't like it. That core team needs to be very clear what they're going to be about. And over here, and 2 more. Should take 2 more and then we'll wrap it up, because I don't want to wear out the saints.
When those people went back to another church, were they accepted?
Oh yeah, but they were complaining. Yeah, they were accepted back, no problem.
And the other thing here, in our situation, I believe we'd go north. Is the border a problem for us to plant a church outside our conference?
No.
No.
We can plant a church in another conference, that's no worries.
Yeah, that can be, those details can be worked out. Yeah, we definitely don't want conference borders to slow us down when we're planting churches, do we?
Justin's already talked about planting a church in South Queensland Conference.
Yep.
My question is, when we lived in Newcastle, we were part of a very small elderly church.
Yep.
And we were the only young family there. And they were desperate to have help running their church and to have new people come to their church, but they just didn't have the capabilities because they were all elderly and dying. Yep. So what do you do? Yes, it's great to be motivated about planting new churches, and I know they were planting new churches in Newcastle, but why not go and plant a church in a dying church?
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Yes. The biggest problem with that is it involves change, people changes. And even when people are ineffective, they're still unwilling to step down out of the role that they're in. I just was at a church, it's a fairly large church, but struggling. And I met a 20-year-old girl who was on fire spiritually, passionate about prayer, passionate about sharing her faith. And I asked her what she liked to do in the church. And she said, I'd love to lead out in prayer meeting. Now, what 20-year-old girl wants to lead out in prayer meeting? She was passionate. I said, can you get people to come out? She said, absolutely. No problem. I'll have people there. Here's the problem. Someone else is leading prayer meeting very ineffectively, right? 3 or 4 people attending. Lecture-style approach. Well, we made the transition in my recommendations, and even privately had a conversation. One of the elders had a private conversation with the lady saying, look, she had taken it initially reluctantly. This lady had taken leading out in prayer meeting, the older lady. And she agreed that if there's someone else that's willing to lead it, let them lead it. As soon as that change was made, all the fireworks went off. She was wounded. How can they do this? And so there are very few churches that are stagnant and declining that are willing to let go of the reins and say, look, we put all this together. We don't have the energy or the leadership to take it further. You guys take over, and we'll support you however you can. That just doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. But that's what it would take.
There is one, because I really think there is some churches like that. It was my experience there that they just didn't want the jobs anymore. They didn't want to go open the church. They didn't want to do anything like that.
It's possible, but it's very unlikely and very unusual.
Far too often, churches, one generation get control of the church, and they never want to let go until they're literally 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot on a banana peel. Then they get desperate and say, we want people, we want people. But I used to think it's such a tragedy that our old churches die, and as I've gotten older, I realized God in His mercy lets these churches that have not fulfilled the mission at all die, so that a brand new church can then be planted with a whole new DNA. And that's what He's talking about. These people, they've been rejecting God their whole lives. There may be established members, but they're not members of God's kingdom. And though it's extremely difficult, unless they have a reconversion and they really want that, it will never happen. It's better to start a brand new church in the area with a new DNA, generally.
Yeah, there are a few resurrections, but they're far and few between. It's easier to have babies than raise the dead. Yeah. But it has happened, hasn't it? I even know that it's happened in modern times. I mean, there's a book, One Miracle After Another. Do you know that? You know that book?
Clouset told us about it, but it hadn't been published yet. So
the Pavel Goya story.
Yes.
Yes.
Somebody told us about it, but I haven't
somebody
seen
in Romania that he hit and killed with his vehicle. That they put the X-rays together and compared him when he came in and he died to when he was resurrected the next day. And they said, how can this be the same man? You know? So it does happen, but it's so unusual that everybody's talking about it. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, we've shared. I pray that as you move forward, particularly as you select your new pastor, some of you raised this question in the interview process.
Australia doesn't work like that at all. The church does not
you don't
interview
have
the
any-
pastor. They don't
When
select
your
their
president
pastor.
comes and talk with you.
The president makes all the decisions here. It's
Look
not like
at
America.
that. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will be seeing Justin, and I will recommend strongly to him as a friend that is kept in mind as the transition, if that's in keeping with your desires that way. You can still do it without, that maybe the strong leadership, as long as they're willing to say, yes, I'll be supportive. They don't have to lead it. But I think that you should work with the conference and see what you can do. Yeah, I think sometimes in America we give the churches almost too much say, and they sometimes don't even know what's best for them sometimes, and they think they want something that might not be the best selection for them. So, all right, let me pray with you. Dear Lord, I want to pray for this church here in Kingscliff that obviously you have blessed with a tremendous ministry here in this area of your work. Lord, as we look to the future, we know there's much more that can be done. We think of this vision of jets of light in every city and village. Lord, we want that to be a reality here. We want to see not only a few conversions, we want to see hundreds and thousands of people brought to your truth. Lord, even as I've talked about what's happened in North Dallas, I know personally from being there that there was so much more that could have been done than what was done. And often we as human beings stand in the way of the very things that you're wanting us to do. Lord, may that not be the case for anybody here that's part of this congregation. May this church be filled with individuals who are catalysts for seeing your church move forward. May this be bathed in prayer. May this be bathed in dependence upon you. And Lord, we just leave your work in your hands, but we also say, Lord, we're wanting to be those that step forward and say, we will be laborers in your harvest. In Jesus' name, amen.